Última hora. Hoy el abogado del Titán y exalcalde de Nueva York alzó la voz sobre lo que está pasando con la seguridad de toda la nación en estos momentos. Rudy llamó a los demócratas socialistas porque eso es lo que son. Están implementando medidas que no funcionaron hace 100 años y menos lo harán ahora. Los resultados son evidentes, el crimen no para de aumentar y la pérdida de vidas de igual manera sigue en aumento. Y lo único que hace la marioneta de la izquierda es culpar a otros de su incompetencia. El Titán por su parte redujo el crimen en grandes cantidades. La persona que sabe de este tema claramente es Rudy. Debido a que cuando fue alcalde de Nueva York, el crimen en general se redujo en un 65%, y la pérdida de vidas se redujo en un impresionante 70%. La ciudad de Nueva York, que era conocida en el mundo entero por sus peligrosas calles, cambió radicalmente cuando Rudy ejerció como alcalde. Este éxito se debió a la promulgación de la llamada Estrategia Policíaca número 5, la cual tuvo como tarea reclamar los espacios públicos de Nueva York, promoviendo un ambiente de valores familiares. Rudy fue llamado el alcalde de América, destacando por encima de todas sus contrapartes demócratas. En el año 2001 fue considerado como persona del año por la revista Time. Personas como el Titán y Rudy son ejemplo de una excelente administración. Por eso sabe que los socialistas terminarán por acabar por completo con la seguridad del país si todo sigue igual. Lo que ha pasado en tan poco tiempo de la marioneta en el poder da muestra de la incompetente administración de izquierda. A continuación la entrevista al honorable Rudy.
So, since Democrats started their campaign to defund police departments across the country last year, spikes in crime have claimed hundreds of lives. Nearly 275 people have been shot in New York City this year alone. The number of shootings and gun victims last year matched the totals for 2018 and 2019 combined. Well, that didn't stop Democrat socialists in New York City's council from voting to end qualified immunity for police officers, making it easier to sue the city's cops. Could this be the end of policing as we know it and be the beginning of a dangerous trend in Democrat-controlled cities across the country? No one is better prepared to discuss the impact of this on New York and other places than the man who turned around the city once called ungovernable, the 107th mayor of the city of New York, Rudy Giuliani. We caught up with him a short time ago. America right now.
Thank you, Tom. Nice to be with you.
So, you know, when I first heard the news about this, Mayor, this anti-police legislation, I immediately thought of you. I lived in the city when you were mayor. I saw the transformation, which was founded, first and foremost, on reducing crime. What will ending qualified immunity for police officers do to public safety and the city that you helped save?
It's devastating. I mean, they're actually committing murder by doing that. The reality is the government of New York City is so incompetent. It's so left-wing. It's built on unrealistic theories of socialism that failed 100 years ago. We have a mayor that there's something wrong with him. He's almost acknowledged to be the worst mayor in America, which is really hard because we've got some pretty bad mayors in America. And in Democrat cities, crime is out of control. Now, the population has to embrace this. They just reflexively vote Democrat, let's say in Chicago. And every weekend in Chicago, it's a good weekend if only 10 people get killed. You could have 20 or 30. This has been going on for 30 years.
Well, it makes no sense. I mean, you're going to now give people the opportunity to sue police officers, and you don't necessarily have to do anything wrong to be sued. You certainly don't have to do anything wrong to have your reputation tarnished, your name dragged through the mud. Isn't that going to increase what's called depolicing across the city for the officers that are frankly brave enough to stay on the job?
100%, and in a massive way. I came from a family of police officers, and I was a prosecutor for 17 years before I was mayor. So I think there's nobody that knows the police in politics better than I do. And I reduced crime more than any mayor in the history of the United States, by far. And I can tell you, except for the really heroic police officers, When you do this to them, when you put their livelihood in jeopardy, when you put their families in jeopardy of not having enough money to feed them or getting out of their job, when they get a call for a robbery, they delay. They wait until the robbery is over. And then they go and just collect the bodies or write up the reports. When I was the mayor, and I had Bratton and Safer and Carrick, who were tough police commissioners, we made them proactive. I wanted them to go into that robbery before it was completed and arrest the robber, or if he had to, shoot him. And if there was any garbage about it, I backed the police officer.
That's right.
They knew that the mayor would be there with them. The mayor wasn't going to throw them under the bus. The mayor was going to stand there with them, and Al Sharpton could yell and scream all he wanted, and Jesse Jackson could come and get arrested. After all, when the people in my city, including the African-American people, are calling for somebody to save their lives, they don't call Jesse Jackson, and they don't call Al Sharpton. In those days, he'd been too fat to come. Instead, they call police officers.
Yeah, you know,
these people are such racial hucksters. It's disgusting.
Mayor, you make a very important point, and that is that these types of policies are going to hurt. They're going to lead to more murder, more shootings in the communities of color that the Democrat socialists claim to care about.
Tom, they kill their own people with their policies.
Yeah.
So you get 70% of the murders in New York City to 75%, and 70 to 75% of the victims in New York City are African American. So just figure if you increase murder by 100, you got 70 more African American people dead. That's true in Chicago. It's true in Atlanta. It's true every place I can tell you. White people murdered 8 to 10%.
Right.
So when we're talking about murder and stopping murder, we're talking about saving lives in the black community. When we're talking about stupid policies that increase murder, we're talking about killing people in the black communities. So don't tell me that Black Lives Matter gives a damn, and don't tell me that Sharpton or Jackson or any of them give a damn. Otherwise, they'd be supporting pro-police policies that save the lives of their people. I saved more black lives in New York City than any mayor in American history by reducing murder. Hundreds, maybe well over 1,000 black lives that would have been lost had I kept the murder rate where it was and what I inherited from my incompetent Democratic predecessors. Mayor, now, you look at a Democrat city and you see a lot of black people dying that don't have to die.
Mayor,
and someday they're gonna make the connection. At least the present Democrat, who's got all these crazy left-wing ideas in his head, should not be running cities. They're too dangerous. Their ideas are too unrealistic. Their ideas sacrifice lives on the altar of a failed ideology. And we can go through Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, Baltimore, 50 years of incompetent, in some cases, crooked Democrats. Philadelphia. That's one city in America where every other mayor goes to jail. I think they skip one because the jails get too filled with mayors.
Mr. Mayor, the bill also restricts recruitment of new police officers to only city residents. I'm not sure how you're going to be able to staff a 30,000 officer department in the city of New York with a policy like this.
Police officers don't get paid enough to afford to live in New York City by and large. That's why you have to do that. You lose a lot of very good people because the rents, much less buying something in New York, is people listening to this in other parts of America would have no idea how expensive it is. So if you want to have a really good candidate pool, you've got to allow people who live in the suburbs where it's less expensive to be part of that pool.
Mr. Mayor, I think there are a lot of people in suburbs around the country who are asking themselves how this type of a policy shift will impact them. A lot of people, they may say, look, you know, Minneapolis, yeah, they've got their problems in Portland and Seattle and Chicago, but I have my leafy, you know, front yard and my white picket fence, and I'm not in the middle of that mess. But doesn't a policy like this have a spillover effect into suburban communities as well?
Eventually, yes. I mean, the last time crime went up in New York, it stayed up for 35 years. Took 35 years, all through Democrat mayor after Democrat mayor. And it also helped to ignite a crime wave all throughout America. Remember, in the 1980s, America was suffering a violent crime problem, including in the suburbs and the rural areas. Mm-hmm. And now with the drug problem in the rural areas, they can't just say, oh, crime is a city problem. You go to New Hampshire, you go to Tennessee, Kentucky, you go into the rural areas there, you got a big meth problem, you have a fentanyl problem. They're one of the prime areas for that. So crime is no longer just isolated to the cities. And maybe it takes a while, but there's a spillover effect. So, what happens in New York honestly affects the rest of the country because it's the biggest city. It's the communications capital of the country. And for good or bad, it gets copied. Mm-hmm. So New York, crime went up 1960s. We went over 1,000 murders. We didn't get below 1,000 murders for 35 years. 35 years. I mean, think of all those people who died that didn't have to.
Well, certainly time for people to send a message to their elected officials that they won't stand for going the way of New York and the Democrat Socialists in New York. Mayor Rudy Giuliani, thanks so much for your analysis and for being here.
Thank you, Tom.
Everything you've done.
I'm so glad you're covering this. Thank you.
Suscríbete al canal Tu Mundo Ahora y activa la campanita, así no te perderás ninguna noticia de los hechos más importantes de América y el mundo.